Before we jump into the mystery of Cheddar Man, let's set the stage. Imagine standing in a damp cave in Somerset, England, holding a flashlight that glimmers over bones older than pyramids, older than Stonehenge. That's where our story begins, inside Goff's cave, with a skeleton that would rewrite British history. Let's kick this off with a question. What did the first Britons really look like? Most people imagine pale skin, maybe light eyes, walking across green hills. But brace yourself, science has proven the first known Brit, Cheddar Man, had dark skin, blue eyes and curly hair. Shocking, right? Discovered over a century ago in Cheddar Gorge, Somerset, Cheddar Man's skeleton is around 10,000 years old. That makes him Britain's oldest complete skeleton. But here is the twist. We only recently learned he didn't look anything like the stereotypes of ancient Britons. For years, textbooks painted Britain's first inhabitants as fair-skinned hunters. But in 2018, groundbreaking DNA analysis revealed something wild. Cheddar Man had very dark skin and striking blue eyes. Talk about rewriting history in a single test tube. Picture this. A man hunting red deer and wild boar in post-Ice Age. Briton, skin dark as night, eyes bright as sapphire. He was no myth, he was real, living in a land just waking from glaciers. And his story challenges how we picture Britishness itself. But how did scientists unlock these secrets from bones buried for millennia? That's where the magic of ancient DNA comes in. Extracting fragile strands from Cheddar Man's inner ear, geneticists pieced together a portrait that stunned the world. This isn't just about one skeleton, it's about what it means to be British. Imagine learning your nation's first known face isn't what centuries of paintings and history books told you. That shockwave rippled through media, classrooms, and living rooms alike. Here's the hook. History isn't set in stone. It evolves, just like we do. Cheddar Man forces us to ask, what else have we been wrong about? Stay tuned, because this rabbit hole goes deeper than you think. Cheddar Man lived during the Mesolithic period, a time when Britain wasn't even an island yet. Picture a land bridge connecting Britain to continental Europe, wild forests spreading, rivers full of fish, and tribes of hunter-gatherers roaming free. And get this, he wasn't alone. Archaeologists believe thousands of people like him lived in Britain at the time, all with darker skin tones, descendants of populations migrating from the Middle East after the Ice Age thawed. You might be wondering, how did pale skin become associated with Northern Europeans later? That's a story of adaptation, migration, and diet. But Cheddar Man's DNA reminds us that light skin is a recent twist, not the ancient rule. The reconstruction of Cheddar Man was unveiled in 2018 by scientists at the Natural History Museum in London. When they revealed his face, the world gasped. Imagine TV anchors saying, "The first Briton was black."
This is incredible.
It shook the nation. But not everyone took it well. Some celebrated the discovery as proof of Britain's diverse roots. Others resisted, saying it clashed with their image of history. That debate still lingers today. What does it mean when science reshapes identity? Let's zoom in on the science for a sec. DNA tells us about skin color, eye color, even hair type. By analyzing genes linked to pigmentation, scientists confirmed Cheddar Man had a high probability of dark to very dark skin, blue eyes, and curly hair. Imagine his blue eyes shining in the flicker of a campfire, a hunter gazing into the night. That detail, blue eyes with dark skin, feels unusual today but was common in Mesolithic Europe. Diversity was the norm, not the exception. And here, LS, where it gets personal. Many Britons today can trace ancestry to Cheddar Man's people. His DNA lives on. One study even found a man living in Cheddar Village today shares distant lineage with him. How's that for coming full circle? Let's pause. Doesn't it blow your mind how a skeleton can connect us across 10,000 years? This isn't just bones, it's a bridge between past and present. And if you're enjoying this ride, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more time travel storytelling. Now think about Britain 10,000 years ago. Dense forests, rivers carving valleys, animals like aurochs and wild boar roaming. It wasn't the Britain we know, it was raw, wild and alive, and Cheddar Man was right in the middle of it. He was a hunter-gatherer, meaning survival wasn't easy. He relied on stone tools, fire and teamwork. His tribe hunted deer, gathered nuts and fished rivers. Life was tough but sustainable, built on intimate knowledge of the land. And here's the kicker, Cheddar Man and his people weren't farmers. Farming only arrived in Britain thousands of years later, brought by migrants from the Near East. So Cheddar Man lived in a purely wild, pre-agriculture world. Let's take a moment to imagine his daily life. Waking in a cave, stepping out into morning mist, checking traps, scanning the forest for prey. No cities, no farms, just nature. That was Britain's first chapter. Archaeologists found that Cheddar Man's skeleton shows signs of a violent life. He had injuries, perhaps from hunting accidents or tribal conflict. Life back then wasn't peaceful. It was survival of the fittest, every single day. But survival wasn't just about brute strength. It was also about knowledge. Cheddar Man's people knew which plants healed wounds, where to find flint for tools, and how to track animals by footprints in the mud. The cave where he was found, Guff's Cave, isn't just any cave. It holds a treasure trove of ancient bones, tools, and even evidence of cannibalism from earlier inhabitants. Yes, you heard that right. Early Britain wasn't always friendly. But Cheddar Man himself wasn't a cannibal. His remains tell a different story. A hunter who lived hard and died young, but whose DNA preserved a secret that would only surface thousands of years later. By now you're probably realizing this story isn't just about one skeleton. It's about rewriting how we see the roots of Europe. And if history can be turned upside down by a single genome, imagine what else is waiting to be discovered. Think about how art, movies, and schoolbooks shaped your image of cavemen. Now imagine those stereotypes dissolving. That's the power of Cheddar Man. He forces us to unlearn and relearn at the same time. And here is where I want to bring you in. What did you picture when I first said Britain's first human? Be honest. Was it pale skin? Light hair? If so, you just proved how powerful cultural imagery is. Cheddar Man challenges all of that. The reason skin tone matters in this story isn't just science, it's identity. It touches debates about race, nationalism, and belonging. No wonder the headlines sparked heated conversations across Britain and beyond. But here's the beauty. Cheddar Man reminds us that humans have always been diverse, always evolving. There was never one true look for a people. Instead, humanity is a flowing river, changing shape with every migration. And migration is key here. Cheddar Man's ancestors arrived in Britain via land bridges moving from the Middle East through Europe. They carried genes shaped by thousands of years of adaptation. He was part of a global story. Imagine the trek. Families walking across forests, rivers, plains, carrying children, hunting on the move. These weren't isolated, primitive people. They were global travelers in their own way, adapting to new lands as they went. His genes told another secret. He likely had lactose intolerance, meaning he couldn't digest milk. That adaptation only came later with farmers. So while we sip lattes today, Cheddar Man's tribe thrived on meat, nuts, and berries. Scientists also believe Cheddar Man's tribe painted their bodies, wore ornaments, and crafted tools with artistic flair. They weren't just surviving, they were creating culture. Imagine jewelry made of bones or shells glinting in the firelight. Think of him not as a stereotype, but as a full human being, someone who laughed, feared, loved, and dreamed. That's the magic of these discoveries. They humanize history, making the distant past feel close and real. And let's get real. If you met Cheddar Man today, he'd look different, sure, but he was still human like us. His DNA lives on in modern Britons, meaning we're not as separate from him as we think. This is where storytelling meets science. When researchers put a face to Cheddar Man, they weren't just reconstructing bones, they were challenging us to see history through new eyes. And that's why this story matters so much. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, wow, I never knew this, that's the point. History is full of surprises. And if you're curious what else is hiding in the shadows of the past, stick with me, we've got more twists ahead. Cheddar Man's face, reconstructed in 3D, showed high cheekbones, curly hair, and a piercing stare. Journalists described it as the face of Britain's first man. It made headlines across the globe, sparking conversations in classrooms and pubs alike. But remember, he wasn't the first Briton. He was just the oldest complete skeleton we've found. Thousands like him lived, hunted, and died across the land. His fame comes from the luck of preservation. That's the thing about archaeology. What we know depends on what survives. Bones, tools, DNA, they're random fragments. Each discovery is a puzzle piece, and Cheddar Man is just one, though a very important one. His skeleton alone couldn't tell the full story. It was the DNA preserved in the petrous bone of his skull that unlocked his secrets. Without modern genetic techniques, we'd still picture him as pale-skinned. Science changed the narrative. Let's take a second here. Doesn't this make you wonder what future tech will reveal? If DNA can rewrite Cheddar Man's story today, imagine what AI or even newer tools will uncover tomorrow. It's history on Fast Forward. And here's your friendly reminder. If you're enjoying this journey through deep history, don't forget to hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe. Your support fuels more explorations like this one. Back to our story. Cheddar Man wasn't found alone. Gough's Cave has layers of history, from Ice Age hunters to medieval cheesemakers. His skeleton is just one chapter in a cave that's seen 15,000 years of human activity. Archaeologists believe Cheddar Man died in his early 20s. No signs of a violent death were found, but we may never know what ended his life. What's clear is his body was carefully placed, preserved by the cave's unique conditions. Imagine being the scientist who first held his skull, realizing you were looking at the face of Britain's earliest chapter. That moment, between curiosity and revelation, must have felt electric. But for decades, the skull sat in museums, analyzed but never fully understood. It wasn't until DNA testing advanced that his true appearance came into focus. Sometimes history waits for the right technology to speak, and when it spoke loudly. Headlines in 2018 weren't subtle. First, Britons had dark skin. It was a message that rippled beyond science into culture, politics, and national identity. Some embraced it as proof that diversity has always been part of Britain's story. Others dismissed it, saying it was just one skeleton. But that's the thing, one skeleton can challenge centuries of assumptions. And that's where we will pause. Part 1, Cheddar Man isn't just a scientific curiosity, he as a mirror. He reflects how we see ourselves, how nations build stories, and how science can shake foundations. In Part 2, we'll dig deeper into what his DNA means for today. Picking up where we left off, let's dive deeper. Cheddar Man wasn't just a random skeleton tucked away in a cave. He was part of a wave of hunter-gatherers who shaped the foundation of Britain's earliest communities. These people carried knowledge, traditions, and genes that would echo for thousands of years. His DNA links him to the Western hunter-gatherers, a population spread across Europe after the Ice Age. They carried traits like dark skin and blue eyes, which may sound unusual today, but back then it was the rule, not the exception. You can almost picture it. A group crossing rivers on makeshift rafts, children clutching tools, adults scanning the horizon for prey. Every migration wasn't just survival, it was a story, an adventure, the very essence of human resilience. And let me ask you this, when you think about first Britons, do you picture explorers? Because that's what they were. These weren't cave-bound primitives, they were innovators, adapting on the fly, pushing into new territories with courage. Scientists studying his genome also uncovered clues about immunity and diet. Cheddar Man's people likely struggled with diseases we've long conquered. Their bodies weren't armored against all threats, but they survived thanks to sharp instincts. His tribe thrived on wild boar, fish, nuts, and berries. It wasn't farming, but it was balanced. Imagine roasting boar meat over fire, mixing it with foraged herbs. It was survival cuisine, but with flavors modern chefs might envy. One of the biggest shifts that came later, farming, hadn't touched Britain yet. Cheddar Man's time was the last great age of foraging. Within a few millennia, farmers would arrive, and the world he knew would vanish forever. That contrast between forager and farmer is key. Cheddar Man represents the final chapter of wild Britain. His DNA marks the end of an era before wheat fields, cattle herds, and permanent villages redefined the land. Let's pause here. Imagine standing on the edge of a forest, knowing your people have lived this way for generations, but change is coming. Doesn't it feel familiar? Even today, we face shifts that challenge our traditions. History repeats. Another revelation from his DNA, Cheddar Man's tribe had fewer genes for digesting starch compared to farmers. That makes sense, they weren't eating bread or grains. Their bodies were fine-tuned for hunting and gathering. And here's the kicker, despite their Stone Age label, these people were incredibly sophisticated. Their tools, fire-making techniques, and survival strategies prove they understood their world better than most of us ever could. Think about this. Could you survive in the wild for even a week without modern tools? Cheddar Man did it his whole life. That's a level of skill that deserves respect, not dismissal. His people also left behind art. Carvings, ornaments, and painted objects suggest they had a sense of beauty, ritual, and identity. They weren't just scraping by, they were building culture, crafting meaning out of survival. And I want to bring you in here. When you hear hunter-gatherer, what do you picture? Be honest. Dirty, struggling people? Or maybe noble savages? The truth is far richer. These were complex societies with pride and knowledge. Archaeologists also found that Western hunter-gatherers like Cheddar Man intermingled with other groups. That means his DNA wasn't locked in a bubble. It was part of a flowing genetic river across Europe. And here's where things get interesting. Later, new populations arrived in Britain carrying genes for lighter skin. Over time, those traits mixed, reshaping the appearance of future generations. Evolution right before our eyes. So pale skin wasn't original to Europe. It was a later adaptation, likely linked to farming diets and sunlight. That flips the script on centuries of assumptions about who belongs in Europe. Cheddar Man proves identity isn't fixed. It changes with migrations, climates, and diets. The face of Britain in 10,000 BC was nothing like the face of Britain in 1000 AD. And that's the beauty of human history. It's never static. Let's check in. Are you still with me? If this blows your mind the way it does mine, drop a comment. I'd love to hear what image popped into your head when you first heard Cheddar Man. Was it anything close to reality? Okay, let's zoom back into the cave. Guff's Cave wasn't just a shelter, it was a hub of activity. Bones of animals, stone tools, and evidence of meals tell us this was a living, breathing home. His remains were preserved so well because of the cave's stable, damp conditions. It's almost poetic, dark, moist air, protecting the secret of dark-skinned Britons for millennia, waiting for science to reveal the truth. Scientists today can even reconstruct his diet through isotopes in his bones. Turns out fish from rivers and deer meat were staples. This wasn't a monotonous diet, it was varied, seasonal and sustainable. And don't forget, these people weren't isolated. Britain connected to mainland Europe at the time, allowing exchange of ideas, tools, and even people. Cheddar Man was part of a larger network. Imagine walking across Doggerland, the now sunken land bridge that once connected Britain to Europe. Families carrying tools, groups trading goods. It was a prehistoric highway, bustling with life. Doesn't that reframe how you see the past? DNA also revealed Cheddar Man's tribe had adaptations to survive cold climates. Despite dark skin, they thrived in chilly post-Ice Age Britain using clothing, fire, and community strategies. They weren't victims of the cold, they mastered it. This tells us something important. Adaptation isn't just about skin tone. It's about creativity. Fire, shelter, teamwork all mattered more than genetics. That's the human edge. And honestly, isn't that still true today? We adapt with technology, medicine, and culture, not just biology. Cheddar Man reminds us that humanity's survival secret is ingenuity. His tribe likely numbered just a few dozen people. That small scale meant everyone knew each other intimately. Life wasn't anonymous. Every person mattered. Every role counted. It was survival as a family. And let's stop for a second. Doesn't that sound kind of appealing? No endless crowds, no traffic jams, just a tight-knit group depending on each other. Makes you wonder what we've lost in the modern rush. But there was danger too. Small groups meant vulnerability. A harsh winter, a bad hunt, or conflict could wipe out entire communities. Resilience wasn't optional, it was survival. Despite those risks they endured, Cheddar Man's people spread across forests, rivers and hills, carving out a life from Britain's raw landscape. Their footprints are the foundation of Britain's human story. Over time, these groups adapted their tools, refining hunting strategies, crafting sharper blades, stronger spears, and even ornaments. Innovation wasn't rare, it was constant. Picture him sharpening a flint blade, sparks flying in a dim cave, while children watch, learning skills that ensured survival. Knowledge wasn't written, it was lived, taught, hand to hand, generation to generation. And here's where I want to involve you. Could you imagine living in a world where your survival depends on remembering how to make fire, track animals, or weave clothing? It's a far cry from Google searches, isn't it? Scientists even found genetic markers suggesting Cheddar Man may have had resistance to some diseases, but not all. His world was fragile and illness could sweep through quickly. That reality shaped how tight-knit communities operated. They cared for each other because losing one person could mean losing critical knowledge. Imagine a hunter who knew the best river crossing or a healer who recognized medicinal plants. That knowledge was priceless. So in a way, Cheddar Man's tribe lived in balance. They didn't just consume the land, they respected it because their survival depended on harmony. That's a lesson we could use today, don't you think? Archaeological evidence suggests rituals too, burials, body decorations, perhaps ceremonies. Even in the Mesolithic, humans craved meaning, not just survival. They sought connection beyond the physical world. And let's pause again. Isn't it wild how much we share with them? Rituals, art, community, storytelling. It's all the same DNA expressed in different eras. History doesn't separate us, it links us. The discovery of Cheddar Man's true features reminds us that appearances can deceive. For centuries, people assumed Britain's first inhabitants looked European. But science paints a richer, truer portrait, and that portrait sparked debate. Was it political? Was it cultural? Absolutely. But at its heart, it was just science doing what science does, upending old assumptions with evidence. Some argued one skeleton can't define an entire people, and they're right. But it can open the door to bigger questions, and that's exactly what Cheddar Man did. The point isn't that all early Britons were dark-skinned, it's that human identity is fluid, shaped by migration and adaptation. Cheddar Man is a reminder, not a rule. And let me bring you in here. How does that make you feel? Surprised? Curious? Maybe even challenged? That's good. History should spark conversation, not just memorization. What we know about him isn't perfect. There are gaps, mysteries we may never solve, but that's what makes his story exciting. It's not a closed book, it's a living puzzle, and new discoveries keep coming. Every year, archaeologists and geneticists uncover more evidence about early Britons, each piece adding to the picture. Cheddar Man is just the beginning. Imagine what will happen when more skeletons are tested. Will we find different features, new surprises? History is a story still being written, and you and I are here to watch it unfold. That's why stories like Cheddar Man matter. They remind us to stay humble. Our assumptions can crumble in a single lab test. The past has a way of humbling the present. And that S where we will close part 2. Cheddar Man isn't he just bones in a cave? He is a revelation, a challenge, a mirror. In part 3, we'll explore how his discovery rippled through culture, politics, and identity in modern Britain. Stay tuned. Now that we've seen who Cheddar Man was, let's look at what his discovery meant for modern Britain. The moment his reconstructed face was revealed with dark skin and blue eyes, it sent shockwaves through headlines. For many, it was a complete rewrite of the first Briton image they had in their heads. Before this, schoolbooks often portrayed early Britons as pale-skinned, almost identical to today's population. The new evidence shattered that narrative, forcing the public to confront the reality that Britain's story began with diversity, not uniformity. The media picked up on this instantly. Some celebrated it as proof that identity is deeper than skin color. Others felt unsettled, even defensive, as if history itself had betrayed them. But the truth is, history isn't here to comfort, it's here to inform. Museums showcased the new Cheddar Man reconstruction, and visitors couldn't believe their eyes. People leaned close, studying his dark features, realizing they were looking at their ancestor. Imagine the mix of pride and surprise that stirred. And let me pause here. How would you feel if you discovered your ancestor looked nothing like you expected? Would it change your sense of belonging or deepen it? These are the questions Cheddar Man forces us to ask ourselves. Scientists stressed that genetics, not politics, drove the results. The DNA didn't lie. It told a story of adaptation, migration, and evolution. But society often reads science through the lens of identity, and that made Cheddar Man more than just a skeleton. The backlash was loud in some corners. People who clung to old narratives argued it couldn't be true. How can the first Briton have dark skin? They asked. But science doesn't bend to comfort zones, it bends to evidence. At the same time, educators embraced the opportunity. Teachers began using Cheddar Man to show students how human history is fluid, shaped by movement and change. It became a powerful teaching moment about identity and diversity. What struck many was the idea that skin tone had nothing to do with Britishness. Culture, environment, and community made those people British, not their genetics alone. It's a lesson still relevant today. And here it says where I want to bring you in again, does hearing that Britain's first known Brit had dark skin shift your perspective on history? Drop your thoughts, because this conversation isn't just about the past, it's about how we see ourselves today. The reconstruction itself was a marvel. Using cutting-edge 3D modeling, scientists rebuilt his face muscle by muscle, guided by genetic markers. The result was startlingly lifelike, as if a 10,000-year-old man had just walked back into the room. His high cheekbones, dark curls, and striking blue eyes created a face that felt both familiar and foreign. People said it was eerie, like locking eyes with someone who lived before civilization, as we know it even existed. The artistry behind this reconstruction wasn't just science, it was storytelling. It gave the public a tangible connection to a man who might otherwise have remained an abstract skeleton in a textbook. That's the power of visualization. Seeing his face made the abstract real. It forced people to grapple with history in a way raw data never could. You don't forget the look in reconstructed eyes staring back at you. And let's be honest, don't you think visuals hit us harder than words alone? Imagine if you'd only read about Cheddar Man's DNA. Would it have stuck with you the same way? Probably not. The face gave history a heartbeat. The controversy around his skin color revealed just how much society ties identity to appearance. But in truth, skin is only a thin layer of who we are. Underneath, the story is about survival, migration, and adaptation. Many historians pointed out that Cheddar Man's features shouldn't surprise us. Ancient DNA studies across Europe revealed similar traits. Dark skin combined with light eyes was common among Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. What made him stand out was timing. He was Britain's earliest known inhabitant whose DNA was decoded. That gave his face a symbolic weight far beyond just one individual. He became the poster ancestor of a nation. This symbolism stirred debates about national identity. Was Britishness tied to appearance, or was it always about a shared story of migration and adaptation? Cheddar Man tipped the scale toward the latter. Let's pause again. History often makes us uncomfortable, doesn't it? It challenges the stories we grew up with. But that discomfort is a gift. It means we're learning, expanding, and opening our minds. Another fascinating twist came when scientists checked his mitochondrial DNA. It revealed lineages still present in modern Britain. In other words, some people today could trace their maternal ancestry back to groups like his. Imagine discovering that the man in the museum with dark skin and blue eyes was actually your distant ancestor. That would change dinner table conversations forever, don't you think? Researchers also looked at his Y chromosome lineage, which connected him to wider European hunter-gatherer groups. It showed that Britain wasn't the isolated Cheddar Man. The S people were part of a bigger web of families across the continent. This challenges the myth of isolation. Britain's identity has always been shaped by arrivals and departures, bridges and crossings. Even 10,000 years ago, it wasn't a sealed-off island. It was part of a global human story. And let me ask you this, when you think of Britain's history, do you picture an island fortress or a crossroads? Cheddar Man reminds us it was always the latter, a place shaped by movement and exchange. Beyond the debates, Cheddar Man sparked art, documentaries, and even memes. People couldn't stop talking about him. He became more than a skeleton. He became a cultural icon of how science rewrites history. Artists painted him, filmmakers dramatized his life, and podcasters debated his significance. The man from Guff's Cave went from obscurity to stardom, all because of one breakthrough in DNA science. This shows how history isn't dead. It's alive, reshaping conversations today. Cheddar Man isn't just about the past. He's about how we see race, identity, and belonging right now. And honestly, doesn't that blow your mind? A man who lived 10,000 years ago is influencing debates in the 21st century. That's the kind of time travel only history can give us. Before we move further, I want to hear from you. If you could ask Cheddar Man one question about his life, his world, or his people, what would it be? Imagine what his answer might reveal. Some critics said the focus on his skin color overshadowed bigger lessons. They argued that Cheddar Man's story should also highlight migration, survival, and resilience, not just appearance. But maybe that's the point. His skin color forced society to look deeper, to challenge long-held assumptions, and to see humanity as a story of constant change rather than fixed categories. In that sense, Cheddar Man became a mirror. He reflected back our modern obsessions with race and identity, while also showing us how fragile and flexible those categories really are. Teachers reported that students loved the story. It was dramatic, surprising, and made history feel relevant. Kids don't forget when you tell them the first Brit didn't look like their textbook illustrations. And let's be real, don't you wish history class had been taught that way? With stories that shock, challenge, and connect instead of dry dates and lists. That's how Cheddar Man is reshaping education. Meanwhile, geneticists celebrated the discovery as a triumph of science. Extracting DNA from a 10,000-year-old skeleton isn't easy. It required precision, patience, and technology that didn't even exist a decade earlier. The fact they pulled it off means countless other skeletons can be studied. Cheddar Man opened the floodgates to a new era of genetic archaeology, promising revelations still to come. Each genome tells a story of journeys, adaptations, and struggles. Cheddar Man's DNA wasn't just about him, it was a chapter in the book of Europe's human past, written in code across millennia. And it's a book that keeps surprising us. Just when we think we know how the story goes, science flips the page and rewrites the ending. Isn't that what makes history so thrilling? Let's stop here again. Think about this. 10 years ago, we didn't know what Britain's first known Brit looked like. Today, we do. What will the next decade reveal? Stick with me, because the journey's just getting started. Cheddar Man also reignited interest in ancient migrations. How did his ancestors reach Britain in the first place? Archaeologists point to routes across Doggerland, now swallowed by the sea. Imagine families walking across wide plains where the North Sea now sits, carrying tools and hope, not knowing their path would vanish underwater thousands of years later. That's epic history right there. Doggerland wasn't just a bridge, it was a homeland. People lived, hunted, and thrived there. When it flooded, entire communities disappeared, pushing survivors toward higher ground like Britain. Cheddar Man's ancestors may have been among those survivors, carrying stories of drowned lands. Can you imagine the myths they must have told of worlds swallowed by rising waters? And let's pause for a thought. Doesn't that sound familiar? Rising seas, changing lives, forcing migrations. The past echoes today's challenges in ways we often overlook. His story also revealed how fragile our assumptions are. We think nations and identities are timeless, but they're constantly shifting under the weight of nature, climate, and movement. Britain itself wasn't even an island when Cheddar Man's ancestors first arrived. It became one only after waters rose and cut it off. That reshaped the people and their culture forever. In that sense, geography is destiny. Cheddar Man's life was shaped not just by DNA, but by landscapes, floods, and climates. His skin color was one adaptation among many to a changing world, and that's what makes his story universal. Strip away the labels, and you see a human navigating challenges we'd all recognize: food, family, migration, identity. He's not other. He's us, just in another time. And that's where we'll close Part 3. Next in Part 4, we'll explore how later migrations and farming societies transformed Britain, blending with people like Cheddar Man and reshaping the face of the island forever. As time moved forward, Britain didn't stay frozen in Cheddar Man's era. Around 6,000 years ago, a massive cultural shift began sweeping across Europe. Farming, yes, agriculture arrived, and it completely reshaped the human landscape. Imagine this. For thousands of years, Britain's people survived by hunting, fishing, and foraging. Then suddenly crops appeared, animals were domesticated, and life began to settle into something more permanent. Archaeologists call this the Neolithic Revolution. For the descendants of Cheddar Man, it meant no longer chasing herds across the land, but instead planting seeds in the soil and building villages that stood for generations. And with farming came change, not just in lifestyle, but in people themselves. New groups began moving into Britain, carrying different traditions, tools, and yes, even different DNA. Pause for a second. Can you imagine being one of Cheddar Man's descendants, watching newcomers arrive with strange crops, polished stone axes, and animals you'd never seen before? That must have felt like witnessing aliens land. These newcomers are often linked to early farming cultures from the Middle East, who spread slowly across Europe. By the time they reached Britain, they carried knowledge of wheat, barley, sheep, and cattle. The genetic record shows something striking. The hunter-gatherer DNA, like Cheddar Man's, began to mix with these new farmers. Slowly, the genetic makeup of Britain shifted toward a new blend. But don't think the hunter-gatherers disappeared overnight. In some places, they lived side by side with farmers for centuries, sharing land, trading goods, and maybe even clashing over resources. Over time, farming communities dominated. Their lifestyle simply produced more food, supported larger populations, and allowed them to expand faster. Survival favored those who could adapt. And let me ask you, if you had to choose between the uncertainty of chasing wild game or the stability of growing your own crops, what would you pick? Survival often comes down to those very choices. Archaeologists find evidence of this shift everywhere: pottery fragments, polished stone tools, remains of long houses. Each artifact whispers a story of how life in Britain was transforming at lightning speed. Megalithic monuments also began rising in this era. Think of Stonehenge or giant burial mounds. These weren't just functional, they were symbols of a new worldview, one tied to farming, ritual, and community identity. Imagine Cheddar Man's descendants standing before towering stones, wondering what power these structures held. The world was changing in ways their ancestors never could have imagined. This transformation wasn't just cultural, it was genetic. Ancient DNA shows that farming migrants brought traits like lighter skin tones into Britain, traits that would gradually reshape the population's appearance. And here's a thought. Doesn't it fascinate you that skin tone, eye color, and even lactose tolerance are all markers of human adaptation, shaped by choices made thousands of years ago? Farming also meant new diets. Instead of wild meat and berries, people now relied on grains and dairy. Over time, bodies adapted. Some groups developed lactose tolerance, while others struggled with it. In fact, lactose tolerance is a relatively recent adaptation. For much of history, adults couldn't digest milk, but in farming societies, those who could had an advantage. They gained calories others couldn't. That small genetic twist spread rapidly, changing not just diets but the very biology of future generations. It's another reminder that culture and genes are deeply connected. Farming also changed the landscape itself. Forests were cleared for fields, animals grazed where wild herds once roamed, and the natural world was reshaped to fit human needs. And let me pause here. Don't you think it's incredible how humans went from adapting to nature to reshaping nature itself? That shift changed everything, and it started in eras like this. With farming came larger permanent settlements. Villages grew, social structures developed, and hierarchies began forming. For the first time, inequality crept into human societies. The skeletal remains from this era sometimes show signs of harder labor, nutritional changes, and even conflict. Farming gave stability, but it also came with costs. Still, the advantages outweighed the drawbacks. Populations grew. Britain became home to more people than ever before, paving the way for even greater cultural transformations down the line. The genetic record reflects this expansion. By the end of the Neolithic, the majority of Britain's ancestry traced to these early farmers rather than to hunter-gatherers like Cheddar Man. And let me check in, does that surprise you? The face of Britain, literally and genetically, shifted in just a few thousand years. That's the blink of an eye in evolutionary terms. Archaeological sites like Skara Brae in Scotland give us snapshots of this world. Stone houses with furniture carved from rock still stand today, offering eerie glimpses into daily life. Walking through those ruins, you can almost picture families huddled by hearths, children playing on stone beds, farmers storing grain. These echoes make the past feel hauntingly alive. The Neolithic also brought new forms of art. Carvings, pottery designs, and monumental structures reflect belief systems tied to cycles of life, death, and the land itself. This spiritual shift likely influenced how people saw themselves. No longer small bands of foragers, they became members of larger communities rooted in place, connected by shared rituals. And here, as a thought, don't you think farming reshaped not just society but the very meaning of home? For the first time, people belonged to land instead of land belonging to people. But as stable as this new world seemed, change was never far away. Around 4,500 years ago, another wave of newcomers began moving into Britain, carrying bronze tools and fresh ideas. These were the Beaker people, named after their distinctive pottery. They swept across Europe and into Britain, bringing a new technological and cultural revolution. Their arrival wasn't subtle. Ancient DNA studies suggest the Beaker migration almost completely replaced earlier Neolithic populations in Britain. The genetic turnover was dramatic. That means Cheddar Man's descendants, and even many Neolithic farmers, may have been largely replaced or absorbed by this new wave of people. The island's identity shifted again. And let me ask you straight, doesn't it amaze you how Britain's population flipped so many times? Hunter-gatherers, farmers, Beaker migrants. It's like chapters in a book being rewritten. The Beaker culture brought metalwork, bronze tools, weapons, and ornaments changed daily life, making farming easier and warfare more deadly. Power shifted into new hands. Burial practices also changed. Individual graves with weapons or ornaments reflected new ideas about status, identity, and perhaps even the afterlife. The past was being reshaped at every level. Stonehenge itself saw modifications during this era. The Beaker people left their mark on monuments, blending their traditions with the old megalithic culture of Britain. Over generations, these influences fused into something uniquely British, a mix of old and new, local and migrant, creating the foundation of the island's later identity. And take a moment, don't you think that's a theme we keep seeing? Britain's identity is never static. It's a constant remix of people, cultures and ideas. The Beaker DNA became dominant in Britain, with only traces of earlier groups left behind. This was one of the most significant population turnovers in European prehistory. Yet even as people changed, the land carried memories. Ancient sites, burial mounds, and monuments tied communities to those who came before, creating continuity through change. By the end of the Bronze Age, Britain was a land transformed, genetically, culturally, and socially. Cheddar Man's world was long gone, replaced by new faces, new ideas, and new challenges. But his DNA still whispers in the background, reminding us that no matter how many waves come and go, the story of Britain begins with him and his people. And doesn't that feel powerful? Knowing that one skeleton from a cave links us to the endless chain of change that defines human history. Farming, metals, monuments, all of these layered over Cheddar Man's legacy, creating a complex tapestry of human survival, ambition, and identity. The story of Britain became one of constant reinvention, each new wave rewriting what came before but never fully erasing it. And here is where I'll leave you for this part. Doesn't it make you wonder how much of who we are today is shaped by forgotten migrations? Britain's history is proof that identity is a moving target. Next time, in Part 5, we'll see how iron, empires, and even Rome added their chapters to this island story, layering yet more identities on top of Cheddar Man's ancient legacy. By the time Cheddar Man's bones were laid to rest in that limestone cave, the world was shifting in big ways. Climate was warming, ice sheets retreating. Britain was on the cusp of becoming the green, forested land we imagine today, but humans here had to adapt faster than ever before. Picture it. Dense woods spreading across valleys, rivers cutting through the earth, animals roaming in numbers, elk, deer, boar. This wasn't the Britain of castles and kings yet. This was a raw, untamed world where survival meant learning the rhythms of a new land. Cheddar Man's people would have seen glaciers in the distance, but their daily lives were tied to the hunt, to gathering, to fire. They were testing tools, testing new foods, learning the landscape one step at a time. Imagine their resilience carving a life in a Britain reborn. And here's the twist. These people weren't just hanging on, they were innovating. Stone tools became sharper, more efficient. They learned to fish rivers swollen with salmon. They crafted shelters from wood and hide. Each generation passed down survival secrets like prized heirlooms. It makes you think, if you and I were dropped into Mesolithic Britain, could we last a week? No GPS, no grocery store, just instinct and ingenuity. Honestly, most of us would tap out fast. But Cheddar Man's people, they thrived because the land demanded nothing less. Let's talk community. Cheddar Man didn't live in isolation. He was part of a band, maybe 20, 30 people, family, friends, hunters, gatherers. They worked together because out here, alone meant doomed. Cooperation wasn't optional. It was the cornerstone of survival. Around the fire, they would share food, stories, plans for tomorrow's hunt. Fires weren't just for warmth, they were the first living rooms, the heart of culture. Can't you picture it? A circle of flickering light in a vast, dark forest. Humans bonding in the glow. And that glow lit more than faces, it lit imagination. Archaeologists suspect early groups developed myths, songs, maybe even the roots of spiritual belief. Cheddar Man's people weren't just eating to live, they were laying the foundations of what it meant to be human. Still, it wasn't paradise. Injuries, disease, hunger. These were constant threats. Even childbirth could be deadly. Life expectancy was short, but life itself was full. Every successful hunt, every fire lit, every child raised, those were victories worth celebrating. Here's where it hits home. In their struggles, in their triumphs, Cheddar Man's people remind us of ourselves. Strip away Wi-Fi, strip away skyscrapers, and we're not that different. Humans working, dreaming, loving, surviving, their story is the root of our own. But there's another angle to explore. The landscapes they knew aren't the ones we see now. Rivers shifted, seas rose. Britain was slowly cutting itself off from mainland Europe. Cheddar Man's people may have walked routes now buried under the North Sea. That submerged world, we call it Doggerland today, a lost bridge connecting Britain to Europe. Imagine a vast plain dotted with lakes, rivers, forests filled with life. For Cheddar Man, it was home territory until rising seas swallowed it whole. The loss of Doggerland reshaped everything. Isolation forced Britain's people to become uniquely adapted. They couldn't simply walk back to the continent anymore. The island became their world, their stage. Out of that stage came a distinctly British chapter of humanity. Can you imagine standing on a cliff, watching water rise year after year, swallowing land you once hunted on? To Cheddar Man's people, it wasn't climate change, as we call it. It was just reality, mysterious, terrifying, unstoppable. Let me pause here. Have you ever felt small against the vastness of nature? Whether staring at an ocean, a storm, or a mountain, it humbles us. That same awe, that same fear, must have coursed through Cheddar Man's veins as his world changed. Archaeologists believe rising seas didn't just reshape geography, they reshaped identity. Britain was no longer a highway, it was a destination. Cheddar Man's descendants became islanders, forging a culture tied to shores, rivers, and forests more than endless plains. Tools found near Cheddar Gorge suggest they weren't just surviving, but experimenting. Stone blades with unique flint patterns hint at regional innovation. Maybe we're seeing the roots of distinct traditions forming. Britain wasn't Europe's copy, it was becoming its own. And let's not forget art. Caves across Europe tell us hunter-gatherers loved to create paintings, carvings, ornaments. Cheddar Man's people likely shared that urge. Creativity wasn't luxury, it was identity. Art was proof they were more than hunters, they were thinkers. The Mesolithic wasn't a frozen snapshot, it was a moving story. Populations rose and fell, alliances formed, traditions shifted. Cheddar Man lived at a crossroads where old worlds collided with new beginnings, and every choice shaped the path toward modern humanity. That's the power of his story. It collapses the gap between past and present. The man in the cave, dark-skinned, blue-eyed, living in a land of shifting seas and endless forests. He's not a stranger, he's family, a reminder that history runs in our veins. Scientists keep uncovering clues about his diet too. Isotope analysis of bones shows heavy reliance on seafood and wild game. Think about that. Smoked fish, roasted venison, nuts, berries, Britain's first menu, straight from the wild. And diet shaped everything: health, survival, even migration. People followed herds, followed salmon runs, followed seasons. Cheddar Man's people weren't wandering aimlessly, they were experts reading nature's calendar, better than we ever could today. Archaeologists even found tools stained with residues, evidence of butchering, scraping hides, maybe even preparing medicines from plants. This wasn't primitive guesswork. It was practical science learned through generations of trial and error. And trial meant error, too. Some plants poisoned, some hunts failed. But each mistake carried knowledge forward. In a world where failure could mean death, learning fast was the only way forward. Cheddar Man's people carried scars of hard lessons. Now picture this, a group crossing dense forest, carrying supplies on their backs, children in tow. Every journey was risky, but every step also mapped the land, carved memory into paths. They didn't have maps on paper, but they had maps in their minds. They knew where the rivers bent, where the berries ripened, where herds migrated. That knowledge was power. Lose it, and you lose your life. Keep it, and your people thrived. It was survival encoded not in books, but in stories and lived experience. And storytelling mattered. Around fires, elders would share routes, dangers, lessons. Oral tradition wasn't entertainment, it was survival. One forgotten tale could mean a lost path, a missed hunt, or worse. Stories were the first libraries. That makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many stories did Cheddar Man hear as a child? Myths about the stars, about spirits in the woods, about ancestors watching over them. We'll never know the exact tales, but we can feel their echoes in our bones. Life wasn't just hardship, though. Archaeologists suspect communities celebrated feasts, rituals, dances. Music may have echoed through the gorge, carried by bone flutes or rhythm sticks.
Imagine that, joy in the heart of survival, humanity at its core. If you close your eyes, can't you almost hear it? The crackle of fire, the beat of wood on hide, the laughter of children. That's not distant history. It's the sound of us, just stripped of all the modern noise.
Let's shift to genetics again. Cheddar Man's DNA showed not only his dark skin and blue eyes, but connections to populations across Europe. He wasn't isolated. His blood carried echoes of migrations stretching thousands of miles. That tells us Britain was never a closed-off island. Even before the seas rose, people moved, intermarried, shared tools and traditions. Cheddar Man was a child of countless ancestors, a living mosaic of human history. And we are too. Think about your DNA, billions of letters shaped by thousands of ancestors across continents. Cheddar Man reminds us that we carry more diversity within us than we can see in the mirror. Yet here's the wild part. Scientists reconstructed his face from DNA and skull. When the world saw the results, it challenged stereotypes. Britain's first Brit didn't look like the pale-skinned image many imagined. He was dark-skinned, blue-eyed, and entirely human. That shook people, didn't it? Headlines exploded. Conversations about identity, race, and history surged. Suddenly, the past wasn't just academic, it was personal, political, cultural. Cheddar Man forced us to confront assumptions we didn't even know we had. Let me ask you, how would you feel seeing the face of your ancestor and realizing they look nothing like the history books told you? It's humbling, eye-opening, even uncomfortable. But that discomfort sparks growth, because history isn't neat, it isn't tidy, it's messy, complex, surprising. Cheddar Man's face is a mirror reminding us that human identity can be boxed into neat categories. Diversity has always been there, long before we debated it. And isn't that powerful? One man's DNA, one skull in a cave, can rewrite how we see an entire nation's history. That's the power of science meeting story. Facts meeting imagination. Past meeting present. Of course, some critics question the findings. Could DNA really tell us skin tone so precisely? Was it possible he looked different? Science is cautious. But most experts agree the data is strong and the message clear. Early Britain was darker than we once thought. That's where the beauty lies. Science isn't about certainty, it's about discovery. Each test, each reconstruction brings us closer to truth, but always leaves room for curiosity. Cheddar Man invites us to keep asking questions, to never stop learning. Now zoom out. Cheddar Man isn't just about Britain, he's part of a global puzzle. Similar DNA studies are reshaping our understanding of Africa, Asia, the Americas. Every region holds surprises about who we are and where we came from. 242, imagine piecing together a giant human family tree. Some branches stretch wide, others intertwine, some snap off. Cheddar Man is a small but crucial twig, reminding us that no matter where we live today, our roots run deep and tangled. And the deeper we dig, the clearer it gets. Migration, adaptation, diversity, that's the human story. Not purity, not isolation, but mixing and surviving. Cheddar Man is proof that change, not sameness, is the constant. Think about that the next time someone talks about pure bloodlines or ancient nations. The truth is, humanity has always been blended. The first Brit was proof of it. National identity? It's recent. Human identity? That's timeless. And here's a thought. You and I carry echoes of that same resilience. The ability to adapt, to face shifting worlds, to thrive in new environments. Cheddar Man did it in forests and rivers. We do it in cities and digital spaces. Different tools, same drive. Archaeologists say his people eventually gave way to farmers arriving from the Near East. Another wave, another blending. The Mesolithic hunter-gatherer met the Neolithic farmer. Cultures collided, merged, transformed. And just like that, history moved on. But even as farmers settled, even as traditions shifted, Cheddar Man's DNA lived on. Some studies suggest modern Brits still carry traces of his lineage. Imagine that. Walking through London, Manchester, Edinburgh, and bumping into echoes of Cheddar Gorge. That's legacy. Not statues, not monuments, but genes carried quietly through time. Cheddar Man didn't know it, but his existence ripples through millennia to us, watching, wondering, retelling his story on a glowing screen. So here's the invitation. When you hear Cheddar Man, don't just think cave, bones, DNA. Think about life, laughter, struggle, creativity, resilience. Think about humanity at its rawest, reminding us what really lasts. And if you're still with me now, you know this isn't just history, it's family history. Cheddar Man isn't a stranger in the past. He's kin. And the more we tell his story, the more we remember what it means to be human, across time, across color, across identity. As we enter the final stretch of Cheddar Man's story, let's zoom out once more. His bones may rest quietly in a cave, but his legacy is alive in our questions, in our science, in our sense of identity. The first Brit isn't just a relic, he's a conversation starter across centuries. Scientists still debate details, how accurate the DNA reconstruction was, whether his skin tone leaned darker or lighter, how much of his genetic signature still lingers in modern Britain. But here's the key. The debate itself shows how science is a living process. Every new test, every fresh analysis brings us closer to truth, but truth itself is always unfolding. Cheddar Man reminds us that history isn't carved in stone, it is pieced together bit by bit, shaped by evidence and imagination working hand in hand. And isn't that exactly what makes his story exciting? If it were simple, if it were neat, it wouldn't grip us. It's the unknown, the gaps, the mysteries that keep us leaning forward, eager to learn more. Cheddar Man's silence echoes loud enough to make us curious. Let me ask you, don't you feel it too? That urge to know more, to walk the gorge yourself, to stand where he stood? That's the power of human connection across thousands of years. Curiosity is the bridge that collapses time. Cheddar Man also challenges us to rethink identity. National pride, race, belonging. All of these are modern labels. He lived before such boxes existed. He reminds us that human identity is broader, richer, and deeper than we often allow it to be. In a way, his dark skin and blue eyes symbolize something profound. They show us that diversity isn't new. It's not a modern invention or a political movement. It's the oldest truth about our species. We've always been varied, always been blended, and that should humble us. Whatever lines we draw today, by nation, by color, by culture, they are temporary. What lasts is humanity itself, the thread that runs from a cave in Somerset straight into your life and mine. It's wild to think about, right? A man who hunted with stone blades, who fished rivers with his bare hands, who told stories by firelight. He is part of our story too. His struggles and victories echo in the very genes and cultures we inherit. That connection isn't abstract. Some scientists argue that up to 10% of modern British DNA traces back to Mesolithic hunter-gatherers like Cheddar Man. That means you could be walking past someone today carrying a literal fragment of his legacy. Legacy doesn't always scream, sometimes it whispers. A sequence of DNA here, a cultural pattern there, a memory preserved in soil and stone. Cheddar Man whispers across 10,000 years, and if we listen, we learn more about who we really are. His discovery also proved how powerful archaeology can be. A single skeleton, carefully studied, sparked global headlines, challenged assumptions, and inspired documentaries. Science gave him a voice he never had in life. And through that voice, we see not just one man, but an entire world, a world of forests and rivers, of communities surviving together, of change shaping destiny. Cheddar Man is a lens into the broader human journey, not just a character frozen in time. But we shouldn't romanticize it too much. His life was short, probably hard, full of risks we'd struggle to imagine. That's reality. And yet in that harshness there's beauty, the resilience of being human, the fire that carried us through. And maybe that's the greatest lesson. Cheddar Man wasn't defined by his hardships, but by his survival, by his people's creativity, by their ability to adapt. If he could make it through shifting climates and rising seas, what excuse do we have today? That perspective grounds us. The challenges we face, climate change, social division, uncertainty, aren't so different. The scale is bigger, the tools are new, but the core challenge remains. Can we adapt? Can we endure? Can we thrive? Cheddar Man would tell us yes, because survival is our birthright. Innovation is our nature. Resilience is written in our DNA. His story doesn't just belong to the past, it's a call to action for the present. And that's where you and I come in. His bones are silent, but we can speak. We can tell his story, share his lessons, carry his memory into the future. In doing so, we honor not just him, but every forgotten ancestor who shaped our path. Imagine if Cheddar Man could see us now, cities lit with neon, planes crossing oceans, voices reaching across continents through screens. He might not understand the details, but he'd recognize the spirit. Humans still pushing boundaries, still surviving. And isn't that beautiful? We are the continuation of his fire, his footsteps, his heartbeat. His world ended, but through us it lives. That's the real meaning of legacy, not fame or monuments, but continuity through time. Archaeology often feels distant, bones, stones, artifacts. But when you see Cheddar Man's reconstructed face, when you hear his story told, it collapses that distance. It's like shaking hands with history. That handshake is a reminder. History isn't past tense, it's ongoing. We are living history. Our actions, our choices today will be the artifacts of tomorrow. Just as we study Cheddar Man, future generations will study us. So what kind of story are we leaving behind? Will it be one of resilience, cooperation, adaptation, like his, or one of division and waste? That's the question his silent skull asks every time we look at it. It's easy to forget that we're temporary too. Someday, our bones will rest, our stories will fade. But if we've learned anything from Cheddar Man, it's that even a single life can echo for millennia. And here's where it gets personal again, don't you feel that? That tug that says, I want my story to matter, that's universal. Cheddar Man had it, we have it, and our descendants will too. It's the heartbeat of humanity. Scientists will keep refining the details, debating the shades of skin and eyes, the migration routes, the diets. But at the heart of it, the core truth won't change. We are connected, and diversity has always been our strength. Cheddar Man is a symbol of that truth. A dark-skinned, blue-eyed hunter from a cave in Somerset, reminding us that the roots of Britain and of humanity are richer, more complex, and more surprising than we were ever taught. And the more we tell his story, the stronger that truth becomes. It cuts through myths, through politics, through walls we build. Cheddar Man whispers, we've always been many, and in being many, we are one. If that doesn't move you, think about it this way. 10,000 years from now, someone might study your remains. What will they see? What story will they tell? Will it reflect the best of who we were or the mistakes we couldn't outgrow? That's the challenge Cheddar Man leaves us with, not just to look back, but to look forward. To live in a way that leaves a legacy worth remembering, a story worth telling. His story began in darkness, a cave, a burial, silence, but today it shines light across the world. That transformation is only possible because humans like us care enough to listen to the past. And the past always has something to say. It says, don't underestimate your ancestors, don't assume history was simple, and don't forget that who you are today is built on who came before. Cheddar Man's face with its unexpected features is proof. Proof that history still surprises, still unsettles, still teaches, We can't predict every answer, but we can keep asking the right questions. And maybe that's the best part. Mystery never really ends. It just deepens. Cheddar Man leaves us curious, hungry, restless for more. That hunger is what keeps discovery alive. Remember, every shovel in the ground, every DNA test, every spark of curiosity could reveal another forgotten story. Cheddar Man is just one. How many more are waiting for us beneath the soil? That's the thrill of history. You never know what tomorrow's discovery will rewrite. Maybe another first Brit, maybe a lost culture, maybe something that changes how we see humanity all over again. But for now, we hold on to this one. The story of a man long gone, yet deeply present. A reminder that history isn't about strangers. It's about family. And Cheddar Man is family. His silence is over. His story is ours now. We carry it forward across classrooms, documentaries, conversations, and even videos like this one. He lives through our telling. And as we close his chapter, remember this. The past isn't far away. It's right under our feet, right in our veins, right in the stories we choose to share. Cheddar Man is proof of that closeness. So the next time you hear the phrase "the first Brit," think of him. Not a pale-skinned figure of modern imagination, but a dark-skinned, blue-eyed hunter whose life was as real, as raw, and as human as yours and mine. His story challenges us, it unsettles us, and that's good. Growth doesn't come from comfort. It comes from facing truths that change how we see ourselves. Cheddar Man does exactly that, and maybe that's why his discovery matters more now than ever. In a divided world, his DNA reminds us we've always been connected. In a world obsessed with difference, he shows us that diversity is the original human story. That's a lesson we can't afford to forget, because the moment we stop seeing our shared humanity is the moment we stop honoring our ancestors and risk failing our descendants. Cheddar Man's bones don't speak, but his story shouts. It shouts across 10,000 years. You are one people, don't forget it. That's as powerful a message today as it was then. So let's honor him, not by locking him away in a museum box, but by letting his story breathe, by telling it, sharing it, carrying it forward into the future. That's how we keep his fire alive. And here's the truth. When we tell his story, we're really telling ours. Because in him, we see the roots of who we are, the struggles that shaped us, the resilience that defines us. That's why history matters. That's why stories matter, not because they're old, but because they're alive. Cheddar Man proves that history isn't dead. It's part of the pulse that keeps humanity moving. And if you've stayed with me this far, you've felt it too. That pulse, that connection, that sense of wonder. That's the gift of Cheddar Man. He gives us back a piece of ourselves we didn't know was missing. So now it's your turn. Carry his story forward. Share it with someone. Talk about it. Question it. Wonder about it. Because stories only live if we keep them alive. Cheddar Man's depends on us. And with that, we close this chapter. But remember, it's not really an ending. It's a beginning. So if you've enjoyed this journey through time, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into the mysteries of our past, and share this video with someone who loves history as much as you do, because together we keep the fire burning